Hi guys! Today we'll be recapping a story called Please Throw Me Away. Please like the video and subscribe to the channel. It helps us a lot. Enjoy! We are introduced to our main character, who goes by the name Karina Bifta. It seems she's been adopted from the streets by a powerful duke, who took her in only because she looked like his daughter who had recently passed from a rare disease called Scarlet disease. It had spread throughout the kingdom, and its painful and degrading symptoms, which always led to death, caused speculation to rise that those who caught it had made a deal with the devil. So having a member of your family die from it would lead to the family's downfall. That's why the duke had taken her in, telling her that if she played the role of his dead daughter, well, she'd get whatever she desired. Well, it didn't pan out like that. Everyone in the castle was very abusive of her while she was growing up, even the servants. And now, 10 years after being adopted, she's going to get into an arranged marriage with the Grand Duke Hexion. She was cast aside after the Duke had another daughter. Before going, she finds out she's in fact a bastard child of the Duke, but Karina wishes she'd never known that. While heading to Hexion's estate, Karina's carriage gets attacked by men dressed as knights of the dukedom, and they end up murdering her, letting her believe the Duke, her father, had sent them to kill her. She wishes, while dying, to have one more chance to live her life, and thus, a voice tells her time will rewind for her, and Karina wakes up again in her bed in the Duke's mansion. Karina is woken up by her personal maid, Bella, who tells her she has to get ready, as Paris, her older brother, has returned from the academy. Remembering Paris had finished school 2 years prior, Karina asks Bella what year it is, and is shocked to hear she woke up 3 years prior to her death. She knows that 1 year from then, the youngest daughter of the Duke will be born, and she'll be cast out and ignored right after that. Thus, Karina decides to do things differently this time and run away before that happens. She goes down to the dining hall where the whole family is waiting. She greets her parents and Paris, who, just like always, doesn't even look in her direction when replying to her, always with a cold and distant look in his eyes. She realizes she wasted her time trying to earn affection from this family, and decides to play this game no further, so she excuses herself and leaves. She then goes to the library to get more acquainted with the current topics, as she's forgotten most of what happened that year, and remembers that the yearly hunting competition will soon come, so she cleverly decides to gift the knight who'll be the winner a tassel. She later finds Bella yelling at her, scolding her for having wandered around the palace. Karina realizes now that Bella, even though being her personal maid, never showed her any gentleness nor respect. She decides it's enough and slaps her in the face, ordering her with a menacing look to beg her to stay. Karina is starting to enjoy herself for the first time in her life, finally being able to enjoy nice meals as she used to feel too nervous to eat anything before. She's determined on leaving the duchy and doing something on her own, thinking maybe she can join an adventurers guild to pursue her interest in archaeology. She's studied hard since a young age, mastering very diverse topics, as she'd always worked hard to try to impress her father, though it never seemed to be enough for him. She even remembers how she used to always make tassels for her father and brother for the hunting competition, even though they never accepted them, causing her to be ridiculed by her peers. Now she's free of the pressure to be loved by them, choosing to save herself instead. Karina goes to a shop to get the materials she needs to make a tassel for the knight that will win the competition that year. She's warmed by the friendliness of the shop attendant and ends up buying black ribbon and glass beads. As she's returning home, Paris notices something different in her gaze, and it appears that Paris, the Duke, and Bella are meeting at the Duke's office to discuss Karina's new behavior. The morning of the hunting competition has arrived, and Karina is getting ready to board the carriage that will take her there. Bella is much more wary of her these days, though Karina isn't fooled by her, as she knows she's been reporting her every move to her father. Karina starts feeling uneasy while boarding the carriage, and appalled, she notices the Duke boarding it with her. She's quivering with nervousness all the way there, and finally realizes, or remembers, that it's because it was in a carriage that she had died last time around, by the orders of the same man who's sitting before her right now. He asks her if she's feeling ill, but she denies so. Then, he questions her about her recent change in behavior, asking why she stopped calling him father, but she cleverly replies that she's just trying to be respectful, asking him in return how she would usually act. They reach the Fulham Forest, where the competition takes place. Once they arrive, Karina tries looking for the knight in black armor, as he'll be the winner that year, and she spots him. However, she's called back by her father before she can give him her tassel, and he disappears from her sight. She again cleverly calls the Duke father while in public, an action which is also noted by him. The Duke leads her to the family's tent, where she's expected to spend the whole week the competition lasts. Bella is ushering her to her bedchambers in the tent, when she tells her that a letter from the second son of the Bifta family, Paris's younger brother, and her supposedly older brother, Kuarn, has arrived, saying that he'll be returning home soon. Karina gets chills as she suddenly remembers his return, tormenting her as he did when they were younger. Apparently, he's become a very skilled mage and swordsman. Karina staggers over some papers and finds a map which seems to have the hunting trails marked. She gets excited by it, as she can use it to wander around while the competition's taking place. Just as she's about to leave, the Duchess enters the tent. She's glaring at her, as always, and Karina swiftly hides the map, turning her head and not greeting the Duchess. The Duchess questions her about it, and Karina faces her, telling her she'd never liked her greetings, to which the Duchess slaps her twice. She then harshly tells her not to speak back to her, and Karina rushes out of the tent, tears welling up her poor eyes. Poor thing. How come these people are so cruel to her? What has she ever done? Karina runs straight into the forest, running into a huge tombstone which has markings of some ancient language. Obviously, she doesn't feel like going back to her tent just yet, so she decides to sit down and try to translate it. Before she realizes, it's already dusk, so she's standing up to head back to the tents when she hears a low growl coming from somewhere in the forest near her. She fears there might be a wild animal preying on her, and just like that, a hungry wolf appears in front of her, ready to attack. She starts getting her shoes off to be able to run away faster. Weird move, but okay. And starts running away just when it pounces at her. Miraculously, the Black Knight appears and shields her, killing the wolf with one swift move of his sword. He holds her and asks if she's okay. He also informs her that everyone is looking for her in the camp, as she never returned though it was turning dark, and gives her directions to follow to return to camp. Surprised, she asks him if he's not going to accompany her there, which surprises her even more. But he just tells her he'll watch as she leaves because he wishes to stay out a bit longer. Finally, Karina gets the idea that it might actually be a good time to hand him the tassel, and so she takes it out of her pocket and offers it to him. He's a bit hesitant of accepting it at first, asking Karina why she's offering him her tassel, even though they don't even know each other. Of course, Karina can't tell him it's because she knows he'll win the competition, so she smartly tells him that it'd be rude for him not to accept it, finally getting him to agree. However, Karina gets a bit flustered as the knight also asks her to put it on him, as he saw the other ladies do it like that. Thus, she pins it on his chest and he kisses her hand in return, telling her he'll dedicate his victory to her. After that, she finally returns to camp. She goes into her tent, telling a dazed Bella to prepare something more comfortable for her to wear than a dress for the next day. She goes into the tent to find a furious Duke waiting for her. He excuses everyone from the room and asks her what she was doing out, but unsatisfied with her reply, he throws a teacup next to her. He reminds her that she should be fulfilling her role of Karina Bifta, making her shudder, and telling her she's gone out of her mind, even bringing up the incident with Bella. Karina tries standing up for herself, asking the Duke if it wouldn't be troublesome for him too if she were to stop performing her role. But he just smirks at her, telling her he'll starve her to death. So, Karina collects herself and decides to bear this abuse 1 year longer, when she'll finally make her escape. Back in the woods, the Black Knight seems to be having some trouble keeping himself together. The knight's having some health issues and can't find the medicine that'll help him get better. However, before he even needs to, the tassel Karina gives him starts shining and he suddenly feels all right. It's the next morning and Bella lays out a dress picked by the Duke for Karina to wear that day. Karina makes Bella leave her chambers and starts reading the translations of the tombstone she wrote the day prior, which retold a sort of fairy tale-like story about the forest, talking of magical creatures and doorways to magical dimensions hidden within the forest. She then remembers her near-death encounter with the wolf the day prior and tells herself she'll never return. But at the same time, She feels as if she's being called back by it. Karina's having tea with some other noble ladies. One who she knows will die of Carlet disease half a year from then, and another, more annoying one, named Lady Aaliyah. She's notorious for being a troublemaker and has brought a lot of hardship on her father, a marquess. She seems to be trying to pick a fight with Karina, but she just ignores her. Karina is feeling the urge to visit the tombstone one last time, so she excuses herself from the tea table and leaves for the forest. Meanwhile, 3 hooded men approach the tombstone, talking to each other about how it appears to be acting up. Karina goes to the tombstone and is translating again when she feels as though someone is watching her. She's then startled by the appearance of the Black Knight, who tells her he's been following her since she entered the woods alone. She questions him about the hunting competition, asking him whether he should be doing something more important in efforts of winning the darned thing, to which he replies, he's done enough. The knight then notices the tombstone and is quite captivated by it, asking Karina to tell him what she's translated up until now, showing interest in her as he considers people who can read ancient languages to be very rare. She figures nothing bad will come of it and tells him the end of the narration on the tombstone, in which the author tells the reader that the rest of the story can be found on the other tombstones scattered in the forest, and a peculiar warning about not angering the forest master. The knight also appears to be quite interested in the story, and so he offers Karina to go with him to the forest twice a month to translate the rest of the tombstones. Karina is quite opposed to this, as she doesn't even know what this man looks like, but she's trying to refuse him in a polite and hilarious manner. She finally asks him why he's so interested in her, and he tells her it's because she gave him the tassel, asking her if she made it from anything in particular. Karina likes to avoid any sentimental misunderstandings by telling him she just gave it to him because she has no one else to give it to. But he tells her that it might be too late to clarify now. Karina tries to clarify that the tassel was only a thank you for having saved her, but he's not wrong when he points out that he thought she'd made the tassel black because it would suit him. So, just to get rid of him more easily, Karina promises to give him a day of her time if he wins the hunting competition, thinking he won't be able to make up for the lost time he spent talking with her. He gleefully accepts. The last day of the competition ends and the knights are coming home dissatisfied. Karina meets with the Duke in Paris, who asks the Duke about the Black Knight and is told to stay away from him, even though he turns to look at Karina to tell her snarkily that she can get close to him if she wants. That douche. The next day rolls over and it's finally time to announce the winner of the competition. Of course, the Black Knight won by having hunted an astounding amount of animals in just 1 hour, impressing everyone. It is then revealed that the Black Knight is none other than Grand Duke Hexion Milatrio, Karina's future arranged husband 3 years from now. She notices he starts heading her way, drawing everyone's attention, and before she can get away, he kneels before her and offers her the trophy, just as he promised. The Black Knight then heads back to the stage, as he's expected to give an acceptance speech, leaving a speechless Karina behind holding the trophy with everyone's eyes on her. That insufferable Lady Aaliyah approaches her to mock her about having received Hexion's attention, as he is avoided by everyone noble because he's rumored to bear a curse which renders him horrendous. However, Karina seems to be quite fed up with Aaliyah, mocking her in return for having given her tassel to a knight who won nothing. Aaliyah starts to make a fuss, raising her voice to make a scene and make Karina look bad, but Karina has an ace up her sleeve, as she remembers from the future that Aaliyah had become addicted to a foreign drug, which will ultimately lead to her family's downfall. So she uses this information against her, discreetly warning her not to make a fuss and to watch her words from now on. You go, girl. After the ceremony is done, the Duke questions Karina about her relationship with Hexion, but Karina is intrigued to see he doesn't seem to be annoyed or angered by it. Back in their tent, Lord Hexion interrupts them and asks the Duke to see Karina, and oh boy is he gorgeous. Not gonna lie, I was already getting impatient about how the Grand Duke might look, and God am I not disappointed. Karina appears to be even more shocked than we are by his devilishly good looks. Hexion asks to talk to Karina alone outside, and after telling the Duke he'll only be talking to her, talks back to him in a quite unrespectful manner, leaving both him and Karina shocked. Outside, he confides in Karina that he doesn't like the Duke a bit, so he doesn't respect him either. The Grand Duke asks Karina to call him Hexion, but she can only manage to call him Lord Hexion, whilst still blushing uncontrollably. He seems to be quite the flirtatious kind. It seems he's surrounded by rumors as he's someone who's been given a huge title and a lot of influence, apparently out of the blue. And as he always conceals his left arm even in summer, some rumors about him being cursed and scarred also began going around. Hexion asks her about when she'd like to have the date she promised him in return for having won the tournament. She cleverly remembers that 7 days from then, Kuarn will be returning home, so to avoid him, Karina asks Hexion for their date to be then. He accepts, and then he suddenly gets the cute urge to prepare homemade lunches to take. Gosh, I could just melt. He also asks her if she'll also give him permission to call her by her name, and she gives it to him, not caring much for what he calls her, but at the same time, not being able to say the name Karina Bifta from her mouth. She's never said it to herself before, and swore to never do so, as she fears she'll lose the last part of Adele, the lost orphan which she still protects. She returns to her tent, and the Duke questions her what she talked about with Hexion. She tells him it was about a promise she made to him, but tells him not to worry about it, causing the Duke to become annoyed. Karina's not facing the Duke, but she stands her ground, thinking maybe she can hold her ground a little more now that she's involved with the Grand Duke. She tells him that she doesn't need to tell him, and that to fulfill her role as Karina, she also doesn't need to report her every move to him, nor stand the abuse she constantly receives from them. He's enraged now, but luckily for Karina, Paris enters the tent looking for the Duke just in time before he goes on to punish her. The Duke then leaves with Paris, not before reminding Karina to be at the banquet in time. Karina then leaves the tent when she's suddenly surrounded by tens of hooded men mumbling to themselves. She figures her best route of escape is through the forest, and fearing to be killed like last time, she runs into the forest with all her might. They don't follow her into the forest, as it had already become night. Now, deep in the forest, she notices a glowing blue light from the direction of the tombstone and goes there to find the text on the stone is glowing and is different from what it was during the day. Of course, Hexion appears, startling her to death, and asks her to read to him the text as well. Hexion notices Karina's shivering, and so he covers her up with his cape, revealing his left arm. She stares at it, all of the rumors rushing through her head, and Hexion, on noticing this, asks her if there's anything she finds interesting in his left arm, and surprised, she just tells him she's curious. Thus, he takes her hand and places it on his arm, shocking her as she feels it's hard as rock. He asks her if she's afraid, but she gently touches his hand again and tells him no, making him smile. This makes Hexion amazed at her, as his numb hand felt her fingers touching him. He also connects her to a figure he's been seeing recently in his dreams. Karina goes back to deciphering the message on the tombstone while Hexion sits back and watches her. The new message talks about the dangers of the forest at night and how the forest master wakes then. It also talks about something the author disclosed to the world that he tried to retrieve but failed, which is suggested to be a very powerful and dangerous weapon if placed in the wrong hands. It also says that the Fulheim Forest only accepts righteous people at night, as it becomes very dangerous for those who aren't. Both Hexion and Karina seem to be quite intrigued by the writing. Hexion's staring at Karina's smiling face, and when she asks him if anything's wrong, he simply tells her that she looks beautiful when smiling, leaving her speechless. Gosh, he's such a player. The awkward moment passes and Hexion reminds her that they should be returning now, as the banquet's about to end. Karina becomes a bit uneasy by the fact, as she remembers the Duke's warning about not being late, but Hexion, at noticing her nervousness, offers to return together and use him as an excuse, which should alleviate her burden. Back in the Bifta residency, it's only been a day since they returned from the forest, and Karina wakes up to Belle telling her that Hexion has been waiting for her over an hour, though she didn't wake her, as he had told her to let her sleep in. Karina is a bit embarrassed to face him as she has a nasty bruise on her cheek. But she hurries to get ready nonetheless, not wanting to make him wait any further. Karina is severe on the maids she hears gossiping about Hexion, having completely lost the patience she had all those years. As she should. She then enters the room he's waiting in and apologizes for her tardiness. He asks her about her complexion, but she just brushes it off. And in return, she asks him if he heard any rumors about her from the servants while waiting, but he also brushes them off. Karina finally asks him why he came all the way there, and lo and behold, he asks her to marry him. Karina at first thinks he's joking, but he looks dead serious. He then asks her, whispering, if she's being abused by the Bifta, and stunned, Karina turns her face away from him, denying his allegations. However, he's persistent, noting all the time she showed signs of abuse, and even telling her he knows the bruise on her cheek was caused by the Duke after she was late for the banquet. He tells her he can protect her from them, and she doesn't have to lie for them anymore. She asks him what he would gain from this, but he just tells her that being beside her would be enough. Nonetheless, Karina doesn't want to get involved with him, fearing that she will get tied to the name Karina Bifta, and also fearing that the same thing that happened last time around will repeat itself. She doesn't want to be shackled into continuing to be Karina by this marriage to him. So she declines his offer, even though she can't help tears welling up her eyes. He apologizes for having rushed things and tells her he doesn't expect a response right away. Next day comes and he comes to visit her again, but this time he's sitting down for breakfast with the Bifta family. Usually, Karina has her breakfast after the Biftas and they never wait for her. Now that Hexion is there, he wouldn't start until she appeared, and thus the rest of the family wouldn't dare touch their food, making them furious at her when she finally did appear. While having breakfast, the Duchess asks the Grand Duke why he came so early in the morning, but he just ignores her, directing his attention only to a very uncomfortable Karina. The Duchess continues insisting, becoming more furious with each repetition, and finally, Hexion asks her what she said. The Duchess is fuming, and so she asks him why he's behaving so disrespectfully, to which he tells her it's his choice to behave as he pleases. He also tells him he came to propose to Karina, as he'd done the day prior, surprising everyone present. Karina again sternly refuses his offer, surprising everyone even further. Later, as Hexion's leaving, Karina asks him not to come during breakfast and mount a scene like that again, and he seems to understand. Obviously, she knows the Duchess will retaliate on her once he's gone, and immediately after he departs, Karina is called into the Duchess's chambers. There, an enraged Duchess slaps Karina across the face and starts pulling her hair, telling her that just because she's got Hexion's attention, she won't become more than she is now, calling her worthless. Karina sympathizes with her as she recognizes the Duchess's anger is really towards the Duke, and she takes it out on her, as she was the result of the Duke's affair. Karina tells her so, leaving the Duchess speechless and making her stop her hitting. The Duke kept coming every day of the week at different times of the day, but never again during breakfast. Looks like he got the wrong message from Karina. Every day he proposes, and every day Karina refuses him, but each time, rather than getting more discouraged, the effect on him is quite the opposite. He's been acting more and more harshly towards the Duchess, most probably after seeing Karina's bruises, which quite pleases Karina. Once, he even mentions her bruised face at the dining table, referring to it like swollen bread, but everyone there knows what he's talking about. Finally, the day of their meeting to go to the forest comes, and Karina goes to wait for him outside earlier than she expected him to arrive, as she didn't even want to risk the chance of bumping into Kuarn if he arrived in the morning as well. To her surprise, she finds Hexion already waiting for her, and as he waited for 2.5 hours out in the cold, his whole body is freezing. Karina insists that they find a place to warm up and leave after that. But he refuses, telling her he's too excited to go to the forest with her. He even cutely boasts about making lunch for them both and not sleeping because he stayed up preparing everything for their lunch. Honestly, this man is too much. Karina still suggests they warm up before leaving, but the Grand Duke asks her to get going, telling her it's because he's excited, but in truth, he's noticing some hooded figures lurking nearby and watching them. They arrive at the second tombstone of the Fulheim Forest, and as they are descending the horse, Hexion asks Karina if her guards are coming with them, which she denies. He's cleverly trying to deduce who the men following them are without making her worry. He's extremely excited to show Karina everything he prepared for her, and so they have a picnic in front of the tombstone. He made an obscene amount of sandwiches with diverse fillings, and Karina notices how neatly done every single one of them is. He's honestly too cute. She takes a bite and is amazed by its nice flavor. He also gives her some apple wine, and she's amazed by its richness too. The Duke is also fishing for compliments with starry eyes. Gosh, he's too wholesome. He then asks Karina if her family is good to her, already knowing the answer, and tells her that she can go to him anytime if she needs to. He also points out how she still doesn't call him by his name, but rather calls him Lord or Sir Hexion instead, telling her he knows it's because she still hasn't told him her own name. He's really sharp. They finish eating, and Karina gets down to business to decipher the new tombstone. She starts narrating the story, and just as the Grand Duke's about to tell her he really likes her, she vanishes into thin air. Hexion is desperately calling out to her, noting that there haven't been any signs of teleportation magic or anything like that. Much to our surprise, Karina is right there next to Hexion with a blue glow around her. She first thinks he's playing a joke on her, but after she tries touching him and is blocked by a sort of force field, she realizes something else must be going on that doesn't allow Hexion to see nor hear her. She sees she can touch other things, but she's unable to reach him. On noticing her blue glow, she concludes the solution must lie on the tombstone, so she gets down to deciphering it as fast as she can. She fears Hexion will leave the tombstone place in search of her, rendering her defenseless if night would fall and wild animals were to attack her again. She reads on the stone that the place of the forest is called the hallucination space, as it causes illusions only on humans, turning them into a supernatural existence. Hexion is still calling out to her, but amidst his worry, he slows down for a second to think and remembers that part of the forest is known to have random disappearances. He also remembers a scroll he read written by a man who reappeared from the forest. He comes to the conclusion Karina is still out there with him in the same space and can't communicate, and so he says out loud that he'll wait for her there until she deciphers the tombstone and reappears. Even though he believes she's there, as he can feel her calming presence on his body, Hexion is still quite nervous, obviously. Karina then devotes herself fully to deciphering the tombstone, wanting to get it done as fast as possible. As she's doing so, she hears a voice talking to her, and is dumbstruck after seeing a small winged glowing creature talking to her. She asks her if she's a fairy, and the being responds that she is. She asks her what she's doing in the borderland, also asking her if she's ever been there before. Karina tells her it's her first time, and the fairy also notes that the tombstone appears to be protecting her. She remembers another human that was able to go in and out of the borderland as he pleased, the same who wrote the tombstones, a man named Huxenlight. Karina is shocked to hear this, as there are many great legends about this man's role during the foundation of the empire. It's said he was a close friend to the first emperor, and that he defeated a lot of beasts and demons to be able to make the land habitable for humans. The fairy then tells Karina she'll help her return to the human world if she's able to decipher the whole tombstone. Karina agrees, and she spends the whole day furiously writing down everything on the tombstone onto her notepad. At dusk, she finally completes the tombstone's translation, telling the fairy it's done. The fairy asks her to read it to her, but Karina protests as it would take too long to do that. However, the fairy can't talk nor read human language, informing Karina that they've been speaking fairy language all throughout. Instead, the fairy offers her another deal, telling her that if she reads the tombstone to her, she'll make Hexion fall in love with her. Karina blushes at the fairy's offer. The fairy tells her she can make anyone fall in love with her, and Karina is quite astounded, and a bit scared, of how easily they seem to be able to manipulate people's minds. She refuses the offer, surprising the fairy. Karina just gives in to reading it, but first makes her promise not to get mad at what she hears. So, she starts reading to her. Huxenlight talks about fairies, saying that they can be cruel, and some of them even delight in human suffering. Humans who go into the fairy realm are called trespassers, and he says they can return to the human world either by touching another human or by eating something from the human world. Similarly, they can also enter the fairy realm by eating some fairy plants that are found in the human realm. It also says that once a human's been in the fairy realm, they'll be able to see fairies even when they are not in it. Additionally, it says that befriending a fairy will probably make them help you out, and if someone deciphers all of the tombstones, they will either be granted a wish, if they befriended a fairy, or they gain access to the fairy forest. There's also a personal note from Huxenlight on which he talks of his regret of having lied to the fairies by telling them he would spend all of eternity with them. And this seems to upset the fairy a bit, making Karina think maybe she was close to Huxenlight. Once done reading, the fairy flies towards Karina and tells her that she'll give her a reward for having read it to her. Before she can even ask what reward, the fairy blows some glow-in dust on Karina's eyes. Karina feels as though there's something in her eyes, but the feeling subsides. The fairy also warns her not to use her healing powers on humans, confusing Karina a bit. Karina then grabs a sandwich and starts eating it, wanting to return to the human realm. As soon as she takes a bite, the blue glow starts fading and Hexion is able to see her. He immediately grabs her hand, showing how worried he was. She notices she can finally touch him, and so she starts touching him all over in marvel, obviously making him blush hard. She falls into his arms, exhausted from her time in the fairy realm and having had to decipher the tombstone so quickly. She's still a bit shocked to know about the existence of fairies, but even more so, she is scared by it. So she'd rather not have anything to do with them ever again. Much to her disappointment, she immediately notices she's still able to see and hear the fairy, who's now talking to her. She tells her it's because of the dust she blew into her eyes, which allows her not only to see fairies, but everything magical around her. Karina is terrified. The fairy seems to think she gave her a wonderful gift, but to Karina, who wishes to have nothing to do with the magical world, this is more so of a curse. Upon noticing her displeasure of her gift, the fairy becomes angry and a strong gust of wind starts blowing out of the blue. Hexion covers her with his body, as something suddenly flew right into her direction and was about to impact her. Luckily, the fairy quickly calms down and the wind stops. However, Hexion's left arm became exposed because of it, showing a stone-like arm. As soon as he realizes, he flinches and hurries to cover it with his cape, apologizing to Karina. The fairy also sees it and tells Karina it was caused by bile poison, telling Karina that with time, she would probably be able to heal it. Karina is still confused as to what the fairy is talking about, so she explains that the tombstone gave her the power to heal. Karina asks her how she can access that power, but the fairy only remembers Huxenlight saying something about having to have the desire to heal. Then, Karina also asks her if she can remove the blessing she gave her that allows her to see the magic around her. Offended, the fairy says it's too late for that now and starts telling her about the benefits seeing magic has. Karina's still not convinced, but there's nothing she can do about it now. The fairy also tells her that the more tombstones she deciphers, the stronger her power will get, and that the key to using it is probably in a tombstone as well. With that, she disappears. Hexion asks Karina who she's been talking to, and she tells him a fairy. He seems to buy it from the get-go, not needing any further explanations. What a strange fellow he is. Karina asks him about his hand while approaching him. He turns his face away ashamed, telling her it's not contagious. Poor guy. She asks to see it again, and he asks her if she's not disgusted by it. But she reassures him, telling him it's okay. He uncovers it for her, becoming really vulnerable in front of her eyes when he admits it does hurt. She takes his stone hand into her own, wanting to heal him, when suddenly, his arm starts glowing. Hexion's arm starts turning back into normal skin, and while she was touching him, Hexion was also able to feel with his fingers. He's completely astounded by this, and Karina explains what the fairy had told her about her healing abilities. Still in shock, Hexion asks her if she'll help him even though he's infected with Scarlet disease, the same disease which is forcing her into her awful family situation. Karina is flabbergasted. How does he know about her true origins? He starts telling her what he knows, that the Imperial family and the Bifta family have a strong alliance, and how, 10 years ago, the Duke went to the Emperor to beg him to find a doctor that would cure his daughter from the Scarlet disease. He also says he knows about the disease's true nature. Then, he goes on to tell her that their marriage has been arranged 10 years ago when she was first adopted by the Biftas, telling her it's a political marriage that the Emperor proposed in exchange for ignoring the fact that the real Karina had died of Scarlet disease and accepting her as her replacement. Karina is horrified to hear that this has been cooking since she first came into the Bifta family, realizing that she won't be able to escape and live freely once the younger daughter is born, and wondering even more so why she was killed in the first place. Hexion tells her he relates to her, as he also looked for the Emperor's love and suffered in return when drinking the poison the very Emperor gave him. He tells her she can cry in front of him, but Karina refuses to cry anymore because of the Biftas. Hexion is amazed by her strength, noticing how she's even stronger than he is. He then goes on to tell her his story, confiding in her that he actually is an illegitimate child of the Emperor, and all of his life he has had to beg for his life to the Emperor. He was thrown away and neglected, and now he still has to beg the Emperor for his life as there's a medicine he needs to take every 6 hours to stay alive because of the Scarlet disease. He tells her he now wants to turn the tables and asks for Karina's help, telling her that when he's with her, he can skip on taking the medicine and he'll still be healthy. Hexion also tells her that this would help her too, as he knows there's a plan being hacked by the Emperor to kill her and blame the Duke, that the Bifta family is under his control in order to prevent them from gaining too much power. Karina is astonished at this news, thinking that maybe she wasn't killed by the Duke after all. Hexion also asks Karina to tell him her real name, but she's still very reserved about it. He then suggests Karina uses him to take revenge on her enemies, and Karina asks him if the only reason he proposed marriage to her was because she was useful to him. However, he looks at her honestly, squeezing her hand, and tells her that ever since meeting her, he's been enthralled by her, feeling miserable whenever they are apart. Karina is a bit uncomfortable by his words, not knowing how to feel about them. She's wary of trusting him, which is to be expected given the environment she was raised in and, well, the fact she died before because of trusting the Duke. In any case, she thinks maybe her actions might be having an effect on changing her future. So she ventures into telling him her real name, Adele. Side note, from now on, I'll be referring to her as Adele rather than Karina. She asks Hexion how she can start helping him, and he immediately says that by marrying him, even if it's temporary until they get rid of their enemies. He promises he'll protect her and give her freedom, and after a moment's thought, she finally agrees. The Grand Duke gets so excited, he immediately hugs her. But Adele is quite uncomfortable by this still, and so he quickly lets her go, excusing himself and blushing super hard. Adele then returns to the matter of translating the tombstone, now wanting to translate the message that glows at night as she's able to read it during the day because of the fairy's blessing. While she's translating, Hexion falls asleep. She quickly finishes and waits for him to wake up, which doesn't take long. She suggests they return to their residencies, and Hexion asks her if she wouldn't like to run away, as the ducal residency is not a comfortable place for her. He even tells her she can stay at his residency, making Adele blush. She finds him really silly and insists that they just go back to their respective residencies, and wishing she can get to trust him. Adele puts on a hooded cape to go to the back streets of the capital, where she grew up. Hexion had told her they needed an informant to keep up to date with the Emperor's plans, and to his surprise, Adele told him she knew of someone who could help. Now undercover and in the back streets, she finds a young boy that reminds her of her younger self. He plays the role of a tough kid, but Adele bribes him with some golden coins while asking him about a man named Jin. She tells him she's a friend of his, but the kid still refuses to let her see him. Nonetheless, she gives him more coins and he gives in, telling her to come back the next day at the same time. Upon noticing more hungry children, Adele gives the kid the whole bag of coins, telling him it's a bribe. The next day, Adele goes back again into the back alleys and finds the young kid. He tells her Jin said he had no friends, and Adele starts to panic, trying to figure out what to tell the kid to convince him otherwise, when a man talks to her from behind her back, and she immediately recognizes him as Jin. He approaches her, telling her he thought she died, and then takes her hand to lead her to a safer place where they can talk. All while holding her hand, Jin takes Adele through numerous hidden passageways until finally, they emerge at the center of the capital, leaving Adele perplexed. They enter a building belonging to the Information Guild, where Jin leads her into a huge office where he orders an errand boy to make tea for both of them. Adele's really surprised to see how far Jin has come, as she knows this sort of office isn't given to just anybody. Jin tries to make her feel as comfortable as possible, asking her to sit down and even engulfing her in a huge scarf, thinking she may be cold. A hilarious scene happens where Jin starts messing around with the scarf as Adele tells him it's too hot. I mean, I'm already kind of obsessed with Hexion, but I gotta tell you, this handsome fellow is so cute. Adele asks him what made him think she was dead, and he tells her 2 other boys, Jack and Cal, had told him they saw a drowned body be taken from the river, and gave them a leather bracelet he had given her as proof that it was she who had drowned. Adele is appalled, as she tells him that in fact what had happened was that those 2 boys had sold her. Of course, Jin becomes enraged upon hearing this. The errand boy comes back with a cart full of refreshments, and as they have their tea, Adele tells him in detail how Jack and Cal sold her. She asks him if they're still alive, but he tells her they died recently, leaving her aghast. Apparently, they were found beaten to shreds, and Jin tells her with a cold look that it seems someone had a very strong grudge against them. He excuses himself for some bit as he has to take care of some work stuff, but returns quite fast and asks a ninja-looking hooded man to refill the refreshments. Adele is still surprised he can order around so many men, wondering how the past 10 years looked for him. He asks her how she's doing, but of course, she can't tell him the whole truth. As she's running out of time, she tells him directly that she needs a huge favor from him, which may cost him his life and put the guild in danger as it could involve treason. Jin is shocked, asking her if someone's forcing her into that situation. Sternly, she tells him that it's her own choice and she's not working alone. Jin agrees to meet her again, along with her accomplice. She tells him she has to go back home now, but he hastily tells her she can stay there, holding her face while telling her this was supposed to be her home. Okay? Guess we've got a lot to unpack there. Adele says goodbye to Jin and heads back to the ducal residency. As soon as she leaves, Jin instructs some more hooded men to keep a close eye on her and to find out what she's been up to the past 10 years, telling them to be careful, not to be noticed by her nor the royal family. One of them asks him about some men they have locked up in the basement, and he tells them he'll check on them. Adele's returned to the ducal residency, where she notices that, fortunately, nobody noticed her being gone, as Kuarn has finally arrived. She decides to go lock herself in her room until dawn, where she'll prepare some lunches to take with her into her room once more. She wishes to avoid meeting Kuarn as much as possible. As she enters her room, she finds a sack with red stains in the middle of the floor, and horrified, she remembers Kuarn had also brought that last time around, wanting to torment her. She doesn't wish to be tormented by him again, so she takes it out and locks her room and windows. Moments later, chaos sounds from outside her door as Bella found it and looked at its contents. She's then yelled at by Kuarn, who begins banging on Adele's door, demanding she comes out. She decides to ignore him as much as possible, hiding under her covers. Poor girl. I wish I could hug her right now. Right before Kuarn administers a harsh blow on Adele's door, which would have probably knocked it down, the Duke appears and stops him mid-track. Kuarn pleads to the Duke, telling him he's just trying to get her out of her room as she never went down to see him. The Duke knocks on her door and, receiving no response, he tells Kuarn to stop it and go downstairs, that they'll see her the next day. Kuarn's a lunatic. He blows down Adele's door with his magic and approaches her in her bed. She plays it off as if she'd just woken up, but Kuarn doesn't believe her and tries to place his hand on her head. She slaps it away, telling him to get out as she's tired. He asks her what she'd do if he didn't get out, and decidedly, she tells him she'll then leave herself, ordering Bella to prepare a room for her. She tries to stand, but Kuarn uses his magic to immobilize her, lifting her from the ground. Thanks to the fairy's blessing, Adele's able to see red strings flowing from Kuarn, and remembering the fairy's words, she figures they must be Kuarn's magic. She touches one of the strings and the magic breaks off, letting her go and making her fall to the ground. Kuarn is shocked, asking her how she can block his magic. She doesn't want to raise his nor the Duke's suspicion, so she tells him she did nothing. Kuarn, annoyed, then lifts her up again, but now makes her hover outside the window. The Duke tells him to stop his joke, but Kuarn tells Adele he'll let her in once she apologizes. However, Adele cuts the strings and falls again, telling him she'd rather die. Luckily, Adele fell into a pond that's found right beneath her window. As soon as she lands, though, Kuarn pulls her out of the water. He asks her if she's okay, placing a hand on her shoulder, but she furiously slaps it off. She stands and, looking down on him, tells him he's the worst kind of person in the world and she can't stand him. He's surprised and eventually amused by her newfound strength. Bella rushes towards her with towels, but Adele yells at her to stay away, telling everyone in the house she hates them. Go, girl! The Duke then appears, asking her in the most fake tone ever if she's hurt. She decides to tell them all now that she'll marry Hexion, surprising everyone. Kuarn tries to step between her and the Duke, wanting to convince him not to allow it. But as we know, this marriage has been arranged by the Duke as soon as he got her. The Duke turns around to leave, telling her he'll take care of the arrangements, but Adele stops him. She says decidedly that she'll arrange everything herself, even calling him Duke rather than father. This even shocks Kuarn, and the Duke orders someone to bring him a cigar, telling her he's gonna educate her. He threatens to burn her face, and Adele stays still with a horrified look on her face. The Duke then retreats, recommending she keeps her mouth shut until she leaves them. The Duke orders Bella to lock Adele up in a room in the middle of the second floor of the mansion, telling her to feed her every 2 days like they used to. It seems they used to lock her up quite often when she was younger. She used to be so scared and feel so guilty, thinking it had been something she'd done wrong that led her there. Those abusive pricks. Now, with the blessing from the fairy, she's able to see inside the pitch-dark room. Whilst before, she used to stumble around aimlessly in the dark for days. A week goes by, and the Grand Duke arrives at the ducal residency to meet with the Duke and discuss their marriage arrangements. They meet, and while both being passive-aggressive towards one another, the Duke informs Hexion that he'll discuss the details with him and then report to the king. Hexion tells him that he'd rather discuss these details with Adele than with him, but the Duke puts on excuses about her absence, saying she's feeling unwell and she'd rather not have him see her. However, Hexion will not give up so easily, as he already knows them and notices something smelling fishy. With an air of superiority, he reminds the Duke he's not asking to see her, he's ordering him to take him to her. The Duke is stunned, telling him he's being impolite, but Hexion tells him he can notice he's lying about Adele's condition. The Duke tells him he'll go look for her himself, but Hexion insists he goes over to her. However, the Duke is even more insistent, telling Hexion he worries so much about his little girl that he wants to check on her himself beforehand. That lying bastard! The Duke goes to the room Adele's locked in, harshly taking a book from her hands, demanding to know if she was reading it. Adele probably was, but she just tells him she couldn't have as it's pitch black there. It seems the room they locked her in used to belong to the real Karina Bifta. The Duke informs her that Hexion is waiting downstairs for her, ordering her to dress and go see him. However, knowing Hexion, Adele knows he's probably figured something's off. She refuses the Duke's order, telling him she won't listen to any of his commands any longer, and that the doll who used to listen to him is now long gone. He's furious, raising his hand to hit her hard when, thankfully, Hexion grabs his wrist and stops him mid-act. With an enraged look in his eyes, he demands to know if he was about to hit her, and oh God, does the Duke look like he's about to poop his pants. The Duke looks at Hexion, telling him it's his role as a parent to punish his children if they do something wrong. But Hexion's not buying it. He twists his arm behind his back, telling him this abuse is not education, and reminding him that right now, he's below him in power, so he should respect him as well. Hexion completely changes his expression and asks Adele sweetly if she's all right. She tells him she is and asks him how he got there. But of course, we know he went to check on the Duke as he knew something was strange. Kuarn barges into the room, shocked to see Hexion subduing his father and grabbing his hand with all his strength. However, Hexion doesn't even flinch. He shoves the Duke away. Kuarn foolishly tries to punch him in the face, but of course, Hexion dodges it and lifts him up from his neck, telling him to be more careful when going against someone he doesn't know. Kuarn's about to use his fire powers on him, but the Duke motions him to stop, then asking for Hexion's forgiveness for their rudeness. Hexion drops Kuarn and tells the Duke that the law allows for a couple to live together as long as their engagement is announced. So he goes on to tell him that Adele will be staying with him from then on. The Duke is shocked, and Kuarn is fuming. This will ruin the Duke's plan to prolong the engagement to make the Bifta family gain power. Hexion asks Adele what she'd like, and of course, she tells him she'll go with him, and so they leave together. The Duke tries to stop her, but Adele just turns to face him, telling him he'll regret how he mistreated her one day. Kuwarn blows off, yelling at Adele and telling her she doesn't even know him. Hexion and Adele start walking away, but Kuwarn follows them from behind, even yelling after her by her real name, but she just tells him, with a harsh look, that anything will be better than staying there with them. As they approach the door, they bump into the Duchess, who's looking at the whole situation perplexed. Adele looks down on her, telling her that, as she always wanted, she's finally leaving, and Hexion comforts Adele, even calling her his wife. And just like that, Adele leaves that awful place and doesn't look back. While on Hexion's horse, he asks her if she'd been locked up in that room. Adele tells him that they've been locking her up in there ever since she was little, increasing Hexion's internal anger towards the Bifta, realizing they've been abusing her since she was a child. He also notes she looks thinner, and so he tells her she must eat a lot once she arrives at their residency. Then, he asks how Kuwarn knew her real name, and she tells him she told him her name once when they were little, but she didn't expect him to remember it. Adele also tells him she's been reading Karina's journal when locked up, in which she recounted her pain and fear while dying of scarlet disease. Finally, they arrive at Hexion's residency. Once they arrive, the sweet head butler Orlando introduces himself. Hexion tells him something happened when he went to decide dates for the wedding, so Adele will be staying with them from now on. However, he hesitates when telling them her name, and swiftly, she introduces herself as Karina Bifta again. Nonetheless, Orlando appears to be very good at reading the room and asks her if there's a nickname she'd likes to go by. So she tells him she likes to be called Adele, and he tells her he'll call her that when they're alone. Gosh, I already love him. Orlando leads her to the room, and suddenly realizing she hasn't had a bath in a week, Adele embarrassedly asks if she can have a bath. He tells her he'll make the arrangements and shows her room, telling her Hexion has told him to look after it every day, not knowing when she'd finally be fed up and run away. Adele thanks him, and Orlando asks her to talk to him more informally. He's really the sweetest. Once Adele's showered and changed, Hexion knocks on her door to tell her dinner's ready. She asks him why he came himself instead of having someone else call her, so he tells her that her presence is calming to him and even makes breathing easier, which makes Adele glad. While going to the dining room, Adele asks him where his room is, and he tells her it's on the first floor. Finding this strange, she asks him why, and he just tells her that it will get loud at night. There's a feast laid out on the table, and as they're eating, Adele asks him why he keeps his gloves on even while he's in his own home. He tells her that he doesn't want to make anybody uncomfortable, informing her that the people who work there are there because of the high salary and not because they want to. Adele doesn't agree with Hexion, as by looking at how properly done everything is, she does think the workers there are there of their own accord. In any case, Hexion asks her if there's anything she needs from the ducal residence, as they went away too fast to even grab a bag of her things. She asks him if someone can be sent to pick up her things, but he tells her she doesn't have to have anything of the Bifta anymore, that he can buy her everything she wants. She refuses, telling him she already owes him so much, but he explains to her that not even the most expensive medicine is as effective on his pain as she is. Once dinner is over, they part ways, and as soon as Adele's a few steps away from him, Hexion starts feeling a piercing pain all throughout his body, realizing that the medicine is only making it worse and making him more dependent on it. He collapses on his bed, sweating from the pain. Sometime later, Adele is turning in her bed and she can't sleep. She decides to go fetch a glass of water, and as she walks past the Grand Duke's bedroom door, she hears his grunts of pain. She barges in, seeing him crumpled in pain on the bed. Hastily, she goes to his side and takes his hand, wanting to be able to heal him immediately. As she wishes for it, a blue light starts glowing from her hands. Hexion had a reoccurring nightmare. He's masked, and most of his body has already turned to stone thanks to the scarlet disease. He's rushing on his horse through a rainy forest, thinking he should have brought her sooner and not waited for preparations to be over. Before he can get wherever he's heading, he feels his body start to crumble, and as he's dying, he makes a wish to someone to protect her this time. More than a nightmare, it looks like he's remembering his past life. He wakes up and finds Adele sleeping while sitting next to his bed and holding his hand. He wakes her up and thanks her for helping him, but she scolds him for not having gone to her sooner. However, he doesn't want to become too greedy of her, as he wants to keep his promise of letting her go freely whenever she chooses. Hexion then tells her he'll go to the capital to talk to the Emperor about their marriage and get some medicine. telling her he might be gone for a couple of days. She worries for him, as she knows the Emperor is abusive of him too, but he reassures her that he'll be fine. Before going, he asks her for one more favor, to hug her once. He thinks it'll be more effective than holding hands, and even though blushing hard, she accepts. Adele's two new maids, Frey and Julie, are also very sweet towards her. Frey seemed to be very worried for her after seeing she wasn't in her room, and Adele explains she went to visit Hexion, relieving Frey. As Adele's bathing, Frey talks great things about Hexion. This makes Adele smile as she sees Hexion is surrounded by great people. They have breakfast together with Hexion, and she tells him about what she translated from the second tombstone. She warns him that they should retrieve the notebook from the duchy, as she thinks it would be troublesome if the Duke were to read it. The stone talks of a disease with the same symptoms as scarlet disease, which spread during the foundation of the empire. There was a tree that made a crying sound, and curious about what was trapped inside, they cut it, releasing the thing that was crying and causing the epidemic. The first emperor seems to have used this to his advantage, as he gained power by becoming the savior of the people, being able to cure the disease. Hexion tells Adele that the same thing may be happening with the current emperor, telling her that he contracted the disease after the emperor exposed him to a poison. He seems to be the only one with medicine that can stop its advances, and only noble families that would come in the way of his plans appear to contract the disease. They decide to go look for the third tombstone after his return. We'll stop here for today, guys. Yes, I know you want more. Don't forget to ask for the next part in the comment section. Thank you guys for watching and for your support. Please subscribe to the channel, it helps us a lot. Till the next one.